If you were stuck in a bog for 2,000 years, you wouldn't look so great either. There is nothing creepier, more gnarly, or more archaeologically gruesome than the bog bodies of Europe. Bogs will preserve you for thousands of years, but it is not pretty. However, they will teach us things we never even imagined. The tragedy of Old Croghan Man. A bog doesn't just hold water and mud, it holds secrets. A lot of them. In 2003, a couple of workers were digging through a bog in County Offaly, Ireland. They hit something that wasn't turf or pipe or the usual soggy trash of rural drainage jobs. It was skin. Human skin. And not fresh either. This skin had been tanning in a cold, acidic Irish swamp for over 2,000 years. What they had found would soon be known to the world as Old Croghan Man, and he wasn't just any random ancient guy who stumbled into a bog and never came out. Croghan Man was a 6-foot, 6-inch tall Iron Age giant, hacked in half, stabbed, strangled, and mutilated in what can only be described as the most excessive resignation letter in the history of ancient kingship. The mystery of who he was, why he died, and what kind of power he once held has turned this muddy torso into one of the most compelling archaeological finds in history. Let's take a closer look, if you've got the guts. A giant emerges from the peat. Old Croghan Man was discovered near the base of Croghan Hill, which is a place long associated with kingship and ancient ceremony. Only months earlier, another bog body had surfaced in County Meath. Old Croghan Man was missing some parts, as you can see. Sadly, bog bodies look like bog jerky, but before that, this man was someone. He was missing his head and his legs. However, what remained of him was so well preserved that it tells us a lot of who he might have been. You could still see his pores, his fingernails, and we even know the last thing he ate. Radiocarbon dating placed Croghan's death sometime between 362 and 175 BC, during the height of the Celtic Iron Age. This was a time when Ireland was carved into about 150 tiny kingdoms, each one with its own local ruler. And judging by his physical stats, Old Croghan Man may have been one of those rulers, maybe even a king. And keep in mind that he was a giant. He was almost 7 feet at a time when the average man topped out around 5 foot 6 inches. Hey, that's my height. That's like being 8 feet tall today. This man would have been large, powerful, and definitely the MVP of the Iron Age basketball team. Royal hands, ritual meals. From the moment researchers examined Old Croghan Man, one thing stood out. He had the hands of a man who had never touched a shovel in his life. They were smooth and buttery, no calluses, no scars, and this was during a time when everyone was a farmer, or at least did some type of manual labor. Just perfectly manicured, soft fingers. The kind of hands you'd expect on someone who gave orders rather than took them. He also wore a braided leather armband on one bicep, decorated in a fashionable European style and possibly symbolizing the sun. This was an emblem tied deeply to kingship and divine rule in ancient Irish belief. Think of his braided armband as the Iron Age equivalent of wearing a Rolex that also says, "I am the chosen one of the gods." This one artifact alone is enough proof to say that our giant was also a king. Or at the very, very least, some sort of chief. Chemical analysis of his fingernails showed he'd been eating a meat-heavy diet, which is yet another clue he was important. Meat was a luxury only the elite could afford at the time. Yes, you could go out and hunt meat, but if you lived in a village, you probably didn't have those skills. And now here's where things get a little weird. The kingly giant who feasted on meat ate a final meal of cereals and buttermilk, a far cry from his usual steak and meat lifestyle. Why the peasant food for his final supper? The answer is deeply disturbing. Scientists have said that his final meal wasn't supposed to be a big, healthy dinner. It was a ritual meal, a ceremonial final course before death. After he ate this paltry serving of cereal and milk, he was brutally murdered. Clive Barker couldn't make up something as gory as what happened to this man. I have to warn you, it is gruesome. And I'm not sparing you any details either. All right, you've been warned. Death by overkill. Old Croghan Man was comprehensively, almost theatrically destroyed. He was stabbed in the chest, strangled with a hazel rope, his neck was slashed, his nipples were sliced off, and his body was chopped in half. That's not murder. That's sacrifice. Archaeologists found hazel rods threaded through holes in his arms. These were likely used to pin or bind him during the ritual, because of course he would have run away otherwise. I mean, no one wants to go out like this. And fight he did. A defensive wound on his left arm suggests he wasn't going quietly. But the most symbolic, and also the most disturbing wound, was the removal of his nipples. You might think cutting off the nipples was simply Iron Age cruelty, but in fact, there was a reason behind it. In ancient Ireland, the king's nipples were seen as sacred symbols. Odd, right? But to the Irish, they represented the sun and sovereignty. One nipple was the sun, the other nipple was the king's right to rule. For old Croghan Man, cutting his nips off wasn't just mutilation. It was a ritual dethroning, a way to permanently revoke his kingship and maybe even his humanity. I don't know what he did. No one does. But someone really hated him. It's very hard to tell what exactly happened. Did he deserve it? Or did someone hatch a plot to get rid of him? For a king to get this sort of treatment, you know it was bad. Killed 19 different ways, humiliated, and then dumped in a bog. The king who had to die. Some experts believe old Croghan Man was a failed royal. Maybe he lost a battle, maybe a crop season collapsed on his watch, or maybe his rivals just wanted a regime change. Whatever the reason, his death was likely an offering to the gods. It was designed as a sacrifice to restore balance, fertility, and political legitimacy after some sort of calamity. As for the gods that were receiving the offering, it's hard to say who was involved. One possibility is the triple-natured fertility goddess who ruled over agriculture, war, and death. All the fun parts of Iron Age life. To satisfy all three aspects of her domain, victims needed to die 3 times. They had to be strangled, stabbed, and then drowned. The bog, which is like a massive waterlogged grave anyway, completed the trinity. Old Croghan was strangled, stabbed, and then drowned in the bog. This goddess was known as the Morrigan, often depicted as a trio of sisters. She was one of the most important gods in all of Celtic mythology, a mashup of the maiden, the mother, and the crone. It's almost as if Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades were all jammed into one body. The Eternal Watchman. Today, what's left of old Croghan Man rests in the National Museum of Ireland in Dublin. Thankfully, he's got the company of the Clonycavan Man, along with a few other bog-preserved unfortunates. But old Croghan Man remains the star of the show. Through his preserved body, we've been given a flesh-and-blood glimpse into the brutal life of ancient kingship. This wasn't a civilization of peaceful druids and misty groves. It was a world where kings ruled by divine favor, and when the land went sour, they paid the price in blood. Maybe old Croghan Man failed his people. Maybe he was framed. Or maybe he just had the misfortune of being in power during a bad harvest. Either way, kings rise and kings fall, but only a few get preserved in mud for 2,000 years and then displayed under glass for eternity. Was eternal fame worth the brutal death? What do you think? The Clonycavan Man. You've met old Croghan Man, and now it's time to meet his neighbor, who was pulled out of the bog just a few months earlier. He is the 2,300-year-old Iron Age murder victim with killer hair. He was short, he was stylish, he was savagely murdered and dumped in a bog. And unlike old Croghan, who scientists think was a ruler, no one has any idea who this guy was. Just some poor sap thrown into a wet, stinking bog and left for the worms. He was discovered in March 2003. A peat harvesting machine was chewing through the soft, ancient soils of County Meath in Ireland when it stumbled upon something decidedly not soil. It was the upper half of a man. The remains belong to a figure who is now one of Ireland's best preserved and most deeply unsettling bog bodies. The best bog hairdo. Bogs may sound like a terrible place to end up, but in the world of accidental mummification, they're a miracle. The cold, acidic, low-oxygen environment halts decay, turning flesh into leather while preserving skin, hair, organs, and sometimes the stuff in their guts. Despite missing everything below the waist, thanks to the peat harvester that ripped him in two, Clonycavan Man's head, torso, and arms were eerily intact. His skin pores were still visible, his nose was flattened, and his teeth were crooked. Scientists guessed he probably only stood about 5 feet 2 inches tall, which was short, even for the Iron Age. And now the hair. Oh my goodness, did this guy have hair or what? On his face was a goatee and mustache. On his head was a full-blown mohawk like he was part of a 1980s punk band. The front of his head was intentionally shaved to give him a higher hairline, while the longer sections were styled and folded with such precision that you'd think he spent all of his time admiring himself in the mirror. And that's not all. Scientists found hair gel in the mix. Clonycavan Man was styling his hair like he was auditioning to be a knight at the Roxbury. His hair gel was analyzed at a lab and found to be an ancient blend of plant oil and pine resin, imported from France and Spain. Not only did he style his lush hair, but he used a product imported from a faraway land. Who was this? Johnny Bravo? The murder. The haircut might have been ahead of its time, but the cause of death was not. Get ready because it's about to get gruesome. Clonycavan Man was hit 3 times in the skull, splitting it open. He was also hit in the nose and suffered a blow to the chest, and these were serious hits that crushed bone and obliterated his insides. This was followed by disembowelment, all that stuff that's supposed to stay inside your body, lungs, liver, spleen, kidneys. His were all ripped out in a disgusting show of primal violence. Only then was he discarded into the bog. As for who he was, that is an unsolved mystery. Peat is great at keeping bodies fresh, but terrible at preserving context. Scientists know what he looked like. They know what he ate, which, by the way, was a diet of mostly fruits and veggies, unlike Croghan, who was a steak aficionado. And scientists know he had a taste for fine grooming. But beyond all these facts, he's a mystery. Was he a failed king like old Croghan? It's possible, as his nipples were also cut off in a similar ritual. But his diet suggests he was more of a noble, perhaps a low-level aristocrat who simply found himself on the wrong end of the bog. Now he's nothing but a leather-skinned corpse, keeping his secrets close to his chest. I think that's enough of that for now. Let's jump ahead to another bog in Denmark. But first, I wanted to give a big shout out and thank you to Tony O'Malley and Raquel Uribe for supporting this channel. We wouldn't be here without you guys. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out. The Bog Dogs. She had no name, no skull, and no grave. She was nothing but a headless skeleton, half buried in a Danish bog. She lay among the remains of 8 sacrificed dogs, their bones still curled near tethering stakes, as if they'd never been meant to leave. What archaeologists have uncovered in Denmark is a ritual site so bizarre, so disturbing, and so soaked in horror that I'm not sure anything will ever top it. They uncovered a window into the brutal, sacred world of Iron Age sacrifice, where gods demanded blood, dogs died like warriors, and bogs swallowed secrets without a sound. Beneath the surface, the ritual site was found in Skodstrup, a sleepy patch of Denmark just north of Aarhus. It was already known to archaeologists, but for different reasons. For years, it had been coughing up random Iron Age relics like a broken time machine, weapons, burned bones, ceremonial objects, and even a carved wooden phallus randomly turned up in digs. But never anything huge or significant. So when Per Mandrup, director of the excavation for Denmark's Mosgard Museum, sent a team to poke around in 2024, expectations were not too high, but not too low either. They anticipated more artifacts, maybe a few spear tips or some pottery. What they didn't expect was a fully intact human skeleton. And they definitely didn't anticipate 8 dead dogs still tethered to wooden stakes, like some ghostly Iron Age kennel. The location where all these ghoulish remains were found is just 600 feet from a previously excavated bog that had already delivered swords, shields, lances, and 13 other dog remains. Apparently, Skodstrup was the place to bring your offerings when the gods needed to be impressed. And there are way too many dog skeletons for comfort. The woman with no head. The human remains belonged to a woman in her 20s. Her body had been carefully placed in the peat, but her skull was missing. It had either been removed deliberately as part of the ritual or was lost to time. Either way, this wasn't some poor soul who slipped into the bog after a bad night at the mead hall. She was part of something deliberate, purposeful, religious. She was an offering. But to whom? Nearby, archaeologists found the foundations of a village, complete with cobbled roads, homes, and a burial ground. And right beside it is this sacrificial bog, which seems to suggest that for this ancient community, death was a part of everyday life. Why the dogs? Why did the dogs have to die alongside this mysterious woman? Experts suspect the dogs were sacrificial animals, part of a ritual meant to sanctify, protect, or plead with something far beyond human understanding. This may seem cruel, but to the ancients, dogs had a special place in the spiritual hierarchy of their culture. They were pets, yes, but they were also protectors, guides, and border agents to the underworld. This culture likely believed that dogs could move between the worlds of the living and the dead. Killing them and offering them to the bog was symbolic, a spiritual transaction. But again, I can't help but wonder who the transaction was with. Who was on the other side of this bog covenant? In Scottstrup, this wasn't a one-time deal. Between this dig and earlier finds, over 20 dog remains have been uncovered in the area, many of them sacrificed and positioned with almost obsessive precision. Historians suspect the whole region of Scottstrup was a prehistoric ritual center, sort of like the area Stonehenge occupies in England, but with a lot more violence. Say what you want about the Druids of ancient England, but at least they don't appear to have been fixated on dog sacrifice. The bogs whispered secrets. To really understand what was going on here, you have to look at the broader Iron Age bog body phenomenon, especially in Denmark. This region has been yielding eerily preserved human remains for over a century. And it's bizarre because during the Iron Age, cremation was the normal thing to do with a body when someone died. Burying an intact human in a bog was far from the norm. It was only ever a ritual. And now for the bombshell. Archaeologists believe that over 500 bodies, 500, have been discovered in peat bogs across northwestern Europe, specifically in Denmark, Ireland, the UK, the Netherlands, and Germany. Most were killed, many were mutilated, and nearly all were preserved by the same miraculous chemical cocktail of cold, acid, and oxygen-free conditions. The most famous of all of these bog bodies is the Tollund Man, and I've got the scoop on him coming up next. But first, what did the gods want? Why did the Iron Age people keep doing this? Surely there was a good reason, right? Some researchers suggest the bog offerings were meant to ensure fertile crops, victory in war, or divine protection. Others think they were about boundary rituals. People may have been marking the edges of territories with blood and bone. Then again, maybe bogs were sacred places in themselves. Water, earth, and decay mingling in a way that blurred the line between life and death. Perhaps these people viewed a bog as a natural altar. Which of these theories do you think holds the most bog water? According to Lot Hediger, Iron Age expert from the University of Oslo, there is no truth because humans today will never uncover the secrets of people alive 2,000 years ago. Lot is adamant that whatever the truth of the bogs is, it is long gone. The gods got what they wanted and took the reasons with them. The Tollund Man. There's a special kind of silence in a peat bog. Not peaceful silence, but spooky silence. If you're looking for an idea for where your next Halloween party should be, why not throw it at a bog, where you get the kind of creepy silence that makes your spine do that little twitch, and your brain go, okay, why does this feel like the opening scene of a horror movie? In the middle of Denmark's Jutland Peninsula, there is a bog that is one of those places. It's flat, wet, and grim. But in 1950, that silence was broken by a squelch and a scream when a couple of Danish brothers, cutting peat, struck something rubbery in the muck. That rubbery thing had skin, a face, and a noose. The body was so eerily well preserved that the Danish brothers, believing they had found a recent murder victim, immediately called the police. They were right about the murder, but off by 2 millennia. This was a killing from 2,300 years ago. The man would become known as Tollund Man. He is, without a doubt, the most hauntingly well-preserved human ever to be pulled from a swamp. Sorry everyone else I talked about today. Tollund Man is the champ. He would become the reluctant poster child for a strange, soggy underworld of European archaeology. He is the mascot for bog bodies everywhere. The faces that stared back. Tollund Man did more than defy time by hiding out in a bog. He was found so amazingly preserved that it looks like for him, time never moved. His leathery skin had been perfectly tanned by the bog's natural acids, while his chin remained stubbled, as if he was still hoping to get a good shave in. Then there is his face. Oddly serene for a guy who died back when the wheel was the hottest thing on the market. His closed eyes seem almost content, like he's at peace. For a guy who had very clearly been hanged, that's saying something. Ole Nielsen, the director of the Silkeborg Museum, said he looks like he could wake up and ask where the coffee is. And while you probably think he's being dramatic, listen to this. Visitors at the museum where Tollund Man is on display often fall silent in front of his glass case. Some people even faint. That's how uncanny he looks. But what really gets under people's skin isn't his good looks. It's the fact that Tollund Man still won't tell us what happened. As you've already learned today, people weren't buried in bogs because they were adored. They were often mutilated, killed in grisly ways, dumped in the bog, and then forgotten by everyone except the moss. These were not liked people. Those who died loved by their communities were not usually left behind in bogs like actual murder victims. Moss to the rescue. You already know that bog bodies last so long thanks to a weird cocktail of swamp chemistry. Raised peat bogs in Denmark, Ireland, and northern Germany are acidic, cold, and oxygen deprived, like a fridge made by druids. But what you don't know is that moss plays a big role too. The moss in the bog releases something called sphagnum, a natural polymer that preserves soft tissue while dissolving the bones. The result is human jerky with facial expressions, which is precisely why Tollund Man and his fellow bog dwellers look like squished leather dolls with hauntingly intact eyelashes. It's why even though they are so well preserved, they are also horrifying and sometimes vomit-inducing. Hundreds of bog bodies, men, women, and even children, have survived thousands of years when most ancient people barely leave a skull. And they should be thanking moss. But of course, they can't talk, even if they look like they might want to whisper. The noose. Tollund Man, like so many other bog bodies, was discovered with a noose still wrapped around his neck. I don't think it was a fashion statement. Let me give you some other scary examples. Lindo Man from England got the full Iron Age special. He was bashed in the head, strangled, had his throat slit, his neck broken, and then was dumped in the bog. That's a triple death right there. Scholars literally refer to this kind of murder as overkilling. Then there's another bog body known as Croghan Man. He had his throat slit ear to ear. And I mean that, ear to ear. His head was almost removed. The Ida girl found in the Netherlands was strangled with a woolen band, lost a leg, and was only around 16 years old when she died. Other bog victims were pinned to the peat with sticks, like Vlad the Impaler got a hold of them. Others were beheaded. Some were naked, some clothed in strange garments, some wearing nothing but a hat. The only commonality is that they all died brutally. But who killed them? And why the theatrics? While some may have been failed kings or criminals, researchers have also proposed a more unsettling theory, that they were volunteer human sacrifices. This seems wild, given the gruesome nature of their deaths, and makes you wonder who would willingly subject themselves to such a fate. Sacrifices for Nerthus. The leading theory to explain bog bodies, popularized by the late Danish archaeologist P.V. Glob, and yes, that was his real name, is that many were ritual sacrifices. You've heard this theory before, but Mr. Glob had a slightly unique take on it. Glob believed they were offerings to the goddess Nerthus, an ancient Earth Mother figure. You know, the kind of deity who really appreciates a hanged man with a nice last meal of barley porridge in his tummy. That's what the Tollund Man ate before he died. A seed-rich porridge, a sort of depressing Iron Age oatmeal. It was either all that the villagers could gather or all they were willing to waste on a guy who was about to be food for the gods. Nerthus was worshipped across Scandinavia and in Germanic areas. She is so obscure today, but was a top dog in ancient times. She's connected to Njord, the Viking sea god. Maybe she was his consort, no one's sure. She is so ancient and vague that almost nothing is known about her, except for a few things that the Romans wrote down. You've got to give it to the Romans. They knew how to record history. According to the Roman historian Tacitus in the 1st century AD, Nerthus was viewed as a bringer of peace. Each year, she was honored during a ritual procession. During the ritual, high priests would wheel a cart draped in sacred cloth through villages. People in these villages cried out in celebration. There was mass hugging in the streets. And that's about all I can tell you. Sorry for the big, disappointing finale, but it's not my fault. Nothing else about her annual ritual is known. She supposedly lived in some sacred grove on some undiscovered island. But no one has talked about her since Jesus was chilling in Bethlehem. P.V. Glob noticed something else while investigating bog bodies. A special artifact known as the Gundestrup Cauldron, which is a decorated silver bowl from 2,200 years ago, was pulled out of a Danish bog. This bowl shows goddesses with twisted cords around their necks. These images are eerily similar to Tollund Man's noose. Glob suspected there was a connection. Maybe Tollund Man wasn't hanged, but had the noose put around his neck because of its link to the goddess Nerthus. And now let's check in with the mainstream scientists to see what they have to say. Science to the rescue. Modern archaeologists aren't just digging anymore. They're scanning, slicing, and scraping with tech that would make CSI jealous. It's like every year, archaeologists inherit a new bag of techno tricks to study the ancient dead. In Paris, Tollund Man's feet were scanned to examine veins and sinews. In Copenhagen, scientists tried to pull DNA from his femur. The DNA trick failed, probably because bog acids destroy DNA like vinegar in a chalk factory. And now scientists are trying again using the petrous bone behind Tollund Man's ear, which could be like a safety deposit box for his skeleton, preserving a scrap or two of DNA. But it's not just bones that researchers are interested in. They want his hair, too. Hair holds strontium, a natural element absorbed through food and water with isotope ratios that act like GPS coordinates for your life. Danish scientist Karen Frey figured out how to clean ancient bog hair and extract that strontium. What she found is that Tollund Man didn't just hang out in one village. He moved, possibly 20 miles in the last 6 months of his life. He seems to have embarked on some great journey to the very place where he was strung up and bogged. It's a cool discovery, but it just adds more baffling questions to this mystery. Why did he hike 20 miles for this dark end? Did he show up and everyone was like, hey, we haven't done a ritual in a while? Anyone thinking what I'm thinking? Other bog bodies like Harald Skaer woman and Huldremos woman showed strontium signatures suggesting travel across Europe in their final months too. It's starting to look like all the bog bodies went on sacrificial road trips. But seriously, scientists have narrowed it down to 2 options. Either these were pilgrims who set out to die on purpose, or option 2, they were unwilling victims dragged from faraway lands because no one wanted to sacrifice their neighbors. Which option do you think is the most likely? Nazis in the bog. Now here's a surprise that no one saw coming. Nazis. In the 1930s, the Nazis latched onto bog bodies as supposed proof of ancient Aryan purity. SS boss Heinrich Himmler created an entire pseudo-scientific institute known as the Ahnenerbe just to prove that Iron Age Germans were noble, disciplined, and racially superior. The Ahnenerbe twisted Tacitus's old Roman writings to claim that the bog bodies were criminals punished for moral failure. Specifically, German scholars came out saying that bog bodies were sexual deviants. One SS scholar even claimed some of the bodies were ancient homosexuals executed by a pure Germanic society. Today, we call that garbage, but at the time, it was dangerously influential. This is what happens when politics are allowed to change history. The Nazis were out here making up their own stories about bog bodies, and of course, they turned them gay. What an absolutely strange episode in modern archaeology. Ironically, one of the only people to challenge the new theories was a Nazi Party member named Alfred Dieck. He argued that bog bodies came from too many places and periods to fit any single theory. Alfred was right, but because of his political ties, he was banned from archaeology after the war. The only guy with the correct theory was banished, just like the victims in the bogs he advocated for. All these decades and political parties later, bog bodies are still a controversial subject. And Tollund Man isn't giving up his secrets easily. Even after 75 years in a museum case and 2,300 years in a swamp, his serene face still refuses to tell us what really happened to him. Thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on all these bog bodies? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out, and let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover in future videos. See you in the next one. Bye!